Good morning and welcome to the Environment and Sustainable Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Eddie Adam and I'm Chair of this committee. This is a remote meeting which has been recorded live to the Council's website and will be available to be viewed for a maximum of 6 months. Please be aware that any footage from the meeting can be used in subsequent media broadcasts. I would like to give a warm welcome to members of the Economy and Enterprise Overview and Scrutiny for agenda item 6 and 7 and the Adults Wellbeing and Health Overview and Scrutiny for item 6. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to officers who will be presenting at today's meeting. Before I commence with the formal business, I would like to cover some housekeeping rules for all participants. As most members know, you must mute your microphone. To speak, use the chat function on the right-hand side. Type RTS, request to speak. However, remember, everyone in the meeting can see the messages in the chat function, so please just use it for the right to speak. When invited to speak, remember to unmute your microphone and introduce yourself with your name and position unless you have already introduced yourself earlier in the meeting. If you are having any connectivity issues, try switching off your video and just use the audio function. If the connectivity issues continue, you may have to leave the meeting and rejoin to find a better signal. If my connection is lost, the Vice Chair, Councillor Olga Milburn, will take over until my connection is restored. That covers the formal part of the housekeeping rules. Let's move on to the formal agenda now. So we have item number 1 is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence, Jackie?
We have no apologies today, Chair. Thank you. Thank
you. So therefore, I take it for item number 2, we have no substitute members.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of November 2020. Seems quite a long time ago. Can we agree the minutes from the meeting on the 16th of November?
Agree.
Agreed. Agreed.
Is there any matters arising? I've had no notification of matters arising. I think all issues from that meeting were distributed to members. Item number 4, declaration of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? None identified, but as always, if anything does crop up, members can raise that at the appropriate time. Okay, item number 5. Any items from co-opted members or interested parties?
Nothing from me, Chair.
Nothing from me.
Thank you. Item 6, we're now moving on to the key areas of the agenda, and the first item that we have on is fuel poverty, and it's a fuel poverty update. And we have Cliff Duff, Housing Regeneration Project Manager, and he's going to be ably supported by Adrian Canto-Jones. Your report is actually on pages 21 to 40 on your iPad. And the presentation is now going to be shared on your screen. So over to you, Cliff. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that.
That's fine, Cliff, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll start my presentation. Morning, everybody. My name's Cliff Duff. I work in the Housing Solutions Service at Durham County Council, and I'm here this morning with my colleague Adrian Canto-Jones to give you an update on fuel poverty. So the first slide. So who are the fuel poor? Well, the government's definition of fuel poverty is low income, high cost, whereby it's based on the household's ability to provide a warm and healthy indoor environment, that being 21 degrees in their living room and 18 degrees in the rest of the property. Now, this used to be the government's definition, I say that because as of yesterday afternoon, the government have launched their brand new national fuel poverty strategy called Sustainable Warmth, Protecting Vulnerable Households in England. And this is relevant because they've actually changed their definition now to something called the low income, low energy efficiency definition. And with this obviously being launched yesterday, it's quite a substantial document, this new national strategy. With the Chair's permission, I'd like to come back to the committee at a later stage, obviously once I've had a chance to review the document and provide a briefing update for the committee.
Yes, that'd be fine, Cliff. We'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. But obviously, for the present stage, the feedback on this revised definition from the National Fuel Poverty Charity, they are predicting that this definition will see an increase in the numbers of households that are categorised as being in fuel poverty. Now, for a bit of a local context on fuel poverty, we can see that in County Durham we have approximately 9.8% of properties that are in fuel poverty, and this equates to about 22,000 households county-wide in fuel poverty. I've got to mention that these are government figures. They come from the government from BEIS, and they're historically 2 years out of date. So these are 2018 figures, so obviously produced prior to COVID. And obviously with the issues revolving around COVID and the lockdown and the changes to the definition, we are probably predicting that obviously we'll see the national levels of fuel poverty increase beyond what you're currently reading here. I thought it would be useful for you to see a county-wide map of fuel poverty. If I can draw your attention to the dark shaded areas on the map, predominantly on the left of the map in the west of the county. These are the areas that have the highest levels of fuel poverty, and the reasons behind this are twofold. One, because these particular areas are off the gas grid, therefore they're reliant on high cost heating fuels such as oil, LPG, electric, etc. But also they are what we call hard to treat properties, whereby they are solid wall, obviously very expensive to insulate, so they have the double whammy of high cost heating fuels, but also properties that are also very difficult or very expensive to insulate. Delivery and monitoring. Fuel poverty is built into the newly adopted housing strategy and in our poverty action plan, but the principal driver for coordinating fuel poverty activities county-wide is our County Durham Affordable Warmth Action Plan. At this point, I have to apologise, Chair, because it says 2015 to 2020. It should actually be 2018. So I apologise, that's in the report. I should have mentioned that. The strategy is reviewed on a regular basis, normally in line when the government make key changes to the funding mechanisms. But obviously we can't do this in isolation, so we have the Energy and Fuel Poverty Partnership that brings together relevant organisations county-wide to assist us with this delivery and working with residents, that being sort of the likes of Age UK, Citizen Advice, East Durham Trust, even the Fire and Rescue Service, etc. Coming together, we can't do this in isolation. Obviously we want to work with as many partners as possible to get the message out to as many residents as possible. So how do we get the message out to residents? Obviously, county is a very large area, so we have at the council something called the Warm Homes Campaign. This is our mechanism to actually sort of get the message out to as many residents county-wide as possible. Obviously, we work with key partners listed at the bottom of the slide to do this, to get the message out. But we find that obviously engagement is key, but obviously confidence and credibility is the key as well, because a lot of the programs I'm going to be mentioning to you are grants where we can give away free boilers, discounted boilers, free central heating systems. So obviously residents may think, well, what's the catch? Well, there isn't a catch. These schemes are genuine and they're out there, but obviously it's up to ourselves as obviously the council and different partner organisations to actually make sure that residents understand how to apply. And that's what we're here to do, the council. We're here to help people apply, but also to give the schemes credibility and let the residents understand how the schemes work, because they all have qualifying criteria normally to receive this assistance. So what help is available? And there are national grants and there are grants that operate inside the county. I'll cover the national grants first. The main ones are the energy company obligation. This is an obligation upon the energy supply companies. It's a tariff placed upon everybody's electricity bill, and that's put into a central pot about £1.9 billion. And that's where the grants come from for the gas boilers, for the insulation grants, etc. These are the national fuel poverty programs, but there are also local programs that we have developed just inside the county. And moving on, the main project is the energy company obligation. Now the criteria for this is if the household is on benefits. And obviously there's been quite a lot of programs like this where obviously that's the qualifying criteria for households, but they have introduced a new project whereby the household will be able to qualify if they have a low income. And this is very important because previously the schemes used to revolve around if the household had benefits, but now if the household is on low income, they can also qualify, but also very importantly, if the household has ill health and has low income, they can also qualify for assistance as well. One of the local projects that we do have is our Warm and Healthy Homes project. Now we're working with GP surgeries county-wide to do this, but we are working with surgeries in the Durham, Dales and Easton and Sedgefield area. And we obviously understand that the GP surgeries do have a lot of work on at the moment, obviously with COVID. We're working with GP surgeries. What happens here is that the GP surgery will write out to their patient. The patient fills in a Warm and Healthy Homes questionnaire and sends it back to the county. And then obviously we're able to contact them to provide them with support and assistance with applying for grants or any assistance we can provide them. Another local project we have in County Durham is the Managing Money Better service. This is free and impartial energy advice on switching suppliers, changing energy companies, getting the cheapest tariff, but importantly on fuel debts. We're finding that obviously a lot of households at the moment are falling into fuel debt, and we can assist them with their fuel debts. And obviously this is becoming an increasingly problem, and obviously very difficult for households, because if they're in fuel debt, it actually locks them into their current supplier. So obviously we're able to assist them in some cases to get them out of the fuel debts. And the last slide is just to give you sort of a case study on the Managing Money Better service. This relates to an elderly couple, a retired couple in Stanley. They moved property from a gas heated property to an electrically heated property. They rapidly found out that their fuel bills were much higher than they had previously experienced. Tried to sort this out by themselves. They spoke to the energy company because they said due to the electric heating system, which is more expensive, they've obviously, the energy company told them that obviously that was the bill they had to pay. So they increased their payments, but rapidly they fell into fuel debt. It actually amounted to about £4,000 over several years. They approached ourselves for assistance. We did a visit to the property because this was pre-COVID days, and we found out the actual meter in the property was running at 126% inaccuracy. So we asked for the energy company to revisit the bills, and they reduced the amount to £1,300, which obviously the couple were very pleased about. But we then asked them to revisit, based on the new meter that was installed, their actual usage. And after lots of dialogue with that energy company, they eventually wrote off all of that fuel debt. And because the household had been paying more increased payments, they actually ended up in credit, and so they received a credit payment. And I'm not trying to allude to the fact that obviously all of the problems are as substantial as this, but obviously if somebody has even a small amount of fuel debt, it's obviously a great worry to them, but also that would lock them into the actual company itself, and they'd find it very difficult to fuel switch. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that report, Cliff. Can you remove the or stop sharing the slides, please, at this moment in time? Thank you. While Cliff's doing that, can I ask members, I'm led to believe that you may not be able to see me on the screen. Is that now altered? Or am I still missing from the screen?
Can see you, Chair.
Right, thank you very much.
Chair, we can see you on this screen. It was on the live broadcast where we couldn't see you, so I'm just waiting for that to catch up, and I'll let you know if we can see you.
Oh, okay, thank you. As long as you can hear me, that's the most important.
Yeah, we could definitely
want to see me. But thanks for pointing that out. So thank you again, Cliff, for obviously a very important presentation and update, and also for obviously rectifying the point about the start of this particular project as being 2018 instead of 2015, because it's also important, obviously we get the dates right, but you also refer to the reviews that are constantly taking place because of the changing government policies on these. So thank you again for that. I do have a number of people who wish to speak. So the first person I'll bring in is Richard Bell, and then Rosemary Morris. Over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. That's a good link with the reference to emerging government policy, because I think it was after economy scrutiny in December when we had a presentation on housing that I raised the consultation the government was then having, somewhat quietly it seemed to me, about basically making it mandatory for rental properties, I think just in the private sector, but I'm not entirely sure, but rental properties to be energy EPC grade C Charlie or better by the middle of this decade. And from my sort of knowledge of housing stock, certainly in a lot of terraced and rural areas, to get to C Charlie, you're talking about solid wall insulation, having done all the obvious things. And I was very concerned about the cost of that and the effect on the housing stock of that. So I've been round the houses a bit in the biz department at government, and eventually tracked down the responsible minister to be Lord Callanan, who was Martin Callanan, we used to be the Euro MP in the North East, and I've had a response from him, quite a technical response, citing the minimum energy efficiency standard regulations. So I wonder if I can probably share that with yourself, Chair, and with Cliff, because I'm going to go back to him raising some further queries, because it gets quite complicated. Essentially, there's, I think from this committee's perspective as well, there's a bit of confusion, I think, in energy performance certificates about, is the government concerned about the cost to tenants, to people renting and living in property, or is the government concerned about CO2, and are they conflating the two things? And the particular point I raised on that in the rural context, because I'm principally interested in fuel poverty for areas that are off gas, off grid. So clearly in the Dales, there's a lot of coal-fired heating, there's a lot of oil-fired heating. And it is the case from my experience that when you get assessed for an EPC, you get marked down a grade just for being on oil. So I challenged the minister, basically said this was an unfair discrimination against rural properties. And he said, well, no, it's not, because oil costs more to heat than gas. So basically the EPC grading seems to be talking about cost, whereas the government targets on the new initiative are all about CO2. So I think there's a little bit of muddled thinking there. But as I say, it gets quite technical, Chair. But I think the issue for the broader issue for the county is that if this doesn't come in with significant extra funding or significant exemptions, you're going to essentially make a huge amount of housing stock in the county unlettable. So I just wondered if Cliff had any views on that. But I do think it's something that the government, how can I put it, needs to be a bit more open up front and forward in terms of like what it's planning, rather than just declaring targets and then somehow we've got to get to them. But I'd welcome Cliff's comments, Chair, on that, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate your investigations into that. I think it will be quite useful to get an update and keep the committee updated on the progress of your investigation. So thanks for that. And it is a real concern to this committee and also to the economy and enterprise, and even in some respects adults in health committee as well, in relation to people who obviously are struggling with fuel poverty at this particular moment in time. But I'll leave Cliff to come in to explain that. Thanks, Cliff.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I can hopefully sort of shed a bit of light here. There's 3 consultations basically taking place simultaneously at the same time. As Councillor Bell mentions, there's a minimum energy efficiency standard consultation that's concluded now, but obviously a response hasn't come out to that. There was a consultation on the National Fuel Poverty Strategy, and obviously, as I've just mentioned, obviously that's now come out as of yesterday afternoon. But there's also another consultation going on for the national grant mechanisms, the energy company obligation. We're currently in the 3rd phase of that. There's a consultation taking place on the launch of the 4th phase, which will come online about 2022. What I'm thinking is, obviously, the new National Fuel Poverty Strategy, although I haven't had a chance to read it yet, it's a 56-page document, may allude to those 2 elements and may have the conclusion from the MEES consultation within it. It may have something within the ECO phase 4 within it, but feedback very, very early stage, obviously, from the National Fuel Poverty Charity, which I tried to get yesterday afternoon for the committee, was saying they're predicting that more funding will be going into energy efficiency measures via the strategy and via the ECO4 programme. Obviously, I can't say that because I haven't had a chance to read the programme, but where the funding was previously for the energy measures, £640 million per annum, I understand from the NEA, and I can't confirm this, it may be raising substantially from that figure per annum to take on board the obligations they're placing into their National Fuel Poverty Charity. And Chair, that's why I'd like to come back to the committee ASAP once I've had a chance to review the document and find out what's within it, because I think it's going to be very relevant to all of the actions I've mentioned, but also helping households county-wide, including those ones off the gas grid.
Thanks for that, Cliff. And yes, we would welcome you back to the committee, but obviously, as there is no more committee meetings until hopefully after an election, it probably more appropriate if you contact through Diane to get a briefing note out to the committee on your findings on that. That would be most helpful. Thank you. I see I've got Adrian Cantle-Jones's hand up. Do you want to fill in a little bit of a gap there, Adrian, before I bring in other members?
Yeah, specifically on the position with landlords with having to bring their properties up to an EPCC rating. That's a big challenge, as Councillor Bell does mention, especially when they're solid wall properties, because it requires a significant investment. And the average EPC rating for properties in Durham is below a C. So, you know, there's an awful lot of landlords out there which will have to significantly contribute to bringing their homes up to an appropriate standard if that new requirement is required. And I think the investment needed behind that, there is substantial investment needed if that's going to happen. In the south, where rental incomes are much greater and where property values are much higher, it's perhaps a little bit easier for landlords. And I think that certainly in some of our more challenging areas, such as some of our regeneration areas, the old coalfield communities, some of the pit villages, you know, the rental values are low there. Getting rentals up and running is challenging. And so to have to invest, you know, you're talking thousands and thousands of pounds to bring these properties up to a C rating is a big challenge. And I think the government needs to recognise probably that there is some further investment needed in support to landlords in areas where of multiple deprivation and fuel poverty. And I know our Housing Solutions Service have actually fed in to that consultation and actually raised this point that in the northeast and in Durham, you know, the challenge is much greater for landlords than it is if you're living in London or if you're living in the southeast of England. So that point's been made, and hopefully there will be some recognition of that.
Thank you, Adrian. Richard, did you want to come back on that point, or is this a different point?
Well, just on the point that Adrian made, I did in my consultation submission and my letter specifically make reference to the fact that a terraced house in Tunbridge Wells will go for 350,000. You can knock a nought off that. if you're talking like Eastern County Durham, and therefore the cost proportion as an actual proportion of the value of the property is way higher for our housing stock. I just think I do hope to listen to some of these points in the consultation. My gut feel, though, is that, how can I put it, this is probably a layer of subtlety that is beyond the people writing some of this policy. We may be in for serious problems there. So it's just to say, Chair, yeah, we do need briefing notes, and we need to keep a very watchful eye on this and where it's going. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. And also, I think it's important with you being in your position as being part of the Conservative Party, plus also local Conservative MPs in the area, may also be to push on that particular matter. So thanks for that. Rosemary?
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
It's really to probably build on some of that, but I was just wondering if you could enlighten us a bit on how we could improve the fuel poverty strategy that you've got in the drive to net zero. I'm conscious of paragraph 19 and 20, where you mention that so many houses got gas-fired central heating, a new gas boiler. Is there any collaboration with providers, i.e. the industry itself, the builders, to actually be aware of the need to use less gas in your strategy?
Thanks, Chair. Can I respond?
Yeah.
Yes. If I can mention something, obviously, is operating with Northern Gas Networks at the moment. There's basically two agendas operating at the moment. There's the new build agenda, where they're saying obviously new houses built after a certain date will not be connected to gas. They'll be using different types of heating fuels. So that's, I think, already moving forward for the new build agenda. But obviously, there are substantial swathes of the whole of the country that are already connected to gas. And if I can just mention sort of a pilot project that Northern Gas Networks are running in the northeast, what they're actually doing is, in a particular area, they're bleeding in hydrogen into the gas network. Yeah. So the boilers are then operating on a combination of a clean fuel, such as hydrogen, and obviously natural gas. So it seems as if the industry is moving forward to the gas infrastructure may eventually become a hydrogen-based infrastructure, which obviously would be a substantial step towards the net zero approach, because obviously these particular gas networks won't necessarily be replaced in the near future, because that will potentially cost a significant amount of money. So I think that the obviously new build properties will move forward with the building regulations, etc., to mandate them to use different types of fuel, i.e. not gas. But obviously for the existing structures, it may be the fact that they are more reliant on cleaner heating fuels, not just LP, obviously gas, but obviously hydrogen based as well.
So are you interacting with them now? I mean, are you not being reactive? You're actually being proactive. If they're doing all these things, are you insisting that that applies in Durham?
No, the fuel poverty strategy doesn't insist on that. That's more of a strategic approach that obviously Durham will be taking through the planning authority. My involvement is to deliver the current affordable one strategy with all of the obligations within it. It doesn't include obviously that particular sort of structure within it. It's obviously to help the existing properties that are already built for the residents within them to obviously minimise fuel poverty within those areas.
Okay.
Okay, Rosemary, thank you for that. I think Cliff is quite right in terms of this particular policy and strategy that we have. It is about existing properties at this moment in time to try and upgrade. But clearly it is going to have to be something that the county is going to have to look at from a planning point of view. And there are already consultations out there in terms of planning. Obviously, we've just recently had the County Durham Plan, which again will need to refocus on what you've just described there in terms of making sure that we do have properties and buildings put up that are more energy efficient and looking at these new technologies that is available out there. So thanks you. I now have Tom Bolton. Tom.
Thanks, Chairman. Tom Bolton, co-opted member. Two issues, please. I wonder if I might ask about. The first is in relation to the map that Cliff showed us during his PowerPoint presentation. I'm just wondering whether it might be possible to get another overlay or overlays on that map. I think I was quite interested, but I did expect to see the rural areas of the county that are off the gas mains shown on that map. But I'm just wondering whether an overlay could be provided showing the demographics and perhaps income, because I think many of us might suspect that there's an older population in the west and southwest of Durham who are off gas mains, and therefore the costs in terms of running the central heating systems, or even practical issues. I have a solid fuel central heating system, so if you're 80, having to carry buckets of coal and fuel to fire up your open fire or a boiler is quite difficult as you age. The second issue, on a more positive note, and for further down the line when we're out of this pandemic, I've been reading a lot recently as a former, I was born and bred in Seam. I've been reading about the new garden village proposals for south of Seam and the district central heating proposals, which are going to use geothermal energy from the Gordon Pit mine workings. I know some of us were lucky a number of years ago to visit the mine water treatment plant and to see the water emerging from the underground workings. And I wonder if at some future point in time, perhaps we might have a presentation about the Seam proposals and perhaps a visit just to see what's going on. I know we've been, I think Maggie Bosencare has mentioned in previous presentations about, I think, Middleton in Teesdale proposals there, and there were some up in Weardale and other options for other new developments in the county to have those types of heating installed. Thanks, Chairman.
Thanks for that, Tom. Yes, we have had previous reports to this committee on the mine water projects and the ongoing new technology work that's available. What you've suggested there about come to a future committee obviously will come up under the refresh of the work programme. So it's something that you can raise at that point in time and something that we could possibly look at including, because it is very important feature. And we need to make sure that the county are keeping abreast and up to date with the movement and the new technology. Cliff, is there something you want to come in, and then I'll bring Adrian in to fill the gaps in again?
Yes, Chair, thanks. Yes, in response to the query about the map, I actually spoke to our intelligence team this week under our epidemiologist. I believe they're doing quite a bit of work on incomes linked to the COVID. So I actually spoke to them. I didn't realise this question would be asked, but I asked them if we could share that information, obviously on incomes obviously being developed. So that dialogue is currently taking place. So if that dialogue is successful, yes, absolutely, that would be great to actually have that integrated into a mapping system. That would greatly assist us with targeting as well. Obviously we use different mechanisms, but obviously because I previously mentioned the criteria to qualify for these grants now isn't just people on benefits, because we work with our revenues and benefits team. It's also on people with incomes less than £30,000. If we can use that demographic to target these households and write to them, I think that would be very useful. That's a corporate decision with the intelligence team, but we've certainly opened up the channels to allow us to do that. So hopefully that should happen fairly quickly. And just on the second point about the garden village, that's not something I'm involved in, but as the chair mentioned, obviously there will be other teams of people who are involved in that. Thanks,
Cliff. Adrian, did you want to come back?
Yeah, just to update Rosemary and Tom on the decarbonisation and of Southwest Durham, really, and a lot of the housing stock. In other words, moving from gas-based fuels and coal and oil to renewables. We are actually proactively, we're actually delivering a project now across the off-gas areas, installing the latest air source heat pump technology in homes such as Tom's, where you're reliant on coal. I can install an air source heat pump now for someone in fuel poverty that earns less than £30,000, an air source heat pump at no cost to them. But that's only part of the challenge. So we are doing that actively. The issue is resources. The amount of money which is available to do this is very limited. I mean, we bid constantly into small pots of national money to get very small amounts of cash. I mean, our programs are only, they're talking in the hundreds, but the challenge is thousands across Durham. The other side of the equation is, putting a low technology heating system into somebody's house is only half the answer, and it very often isn't the answer. The answer is insulation, because there's no point in putting a new heating system into somebody's house where it constantly loses the heat out of the walls. And we have 57,000 solid wall properties in Durham. We have a huge legacy from the coalfields where the properties were built around about the First World War. They were built using solid wall technology. There's no cavities. And so we have 57,000 of those. Often, a lot of them are in southwest Durham, stone built. And we need to insulate those as well as providing a low carbon technology. And insulation, it's a known technology. We know how to insulate houses, and we've got some excellent examples of external wall insulation in Durham, which Cliff and I have delivered. I can give you a number of examples, and I could show you around Ramshaw, Craghead, Southmere. We've got some very good examples of work out there. But the challenge is huge, 57,000, and it costs about just under £10,000 to externally wall insulate a house properly and to do an excellent job of it. It does add to the value of the house, and so it's a very good thing to do. But if you times 57,000 by £10,000, you're coming up into the billions of figures. Now, the government at one time, 10 years ago, we had something called the Decent Homes Programme, or 15 years ago, the Decent Homes Programme, where every council house was given a new bathroom and a new kitchen, and perhaps with double glazing, and that was across the country through arm's length management organisations. And the government at that time invested in Newcastle alone. When I was working on the Decent Homes Programme, we had £1 billion programme to upgrade the homes, just the social homes. Now that's the scale that's needed now. We need, if you're going to actually meet the carbon challenge, get to net zero and warm people's homes up and save them money, has to be investment in it. And the government has announced the Green Homes Programme. It's announced a decarbonisation of social housing fund, a £9 billion pot in the SLAS manifesto, but it doesn't touch the sides, unfortunately. The challenge is huge. Cliff and I are constantly bidding into pots. We've been successful this year alone. We've brought in £6 million for solid wall insulation since February. Since January. Already we've had news of the success there. But that you're only talking hundreds of properties are going to benefit there in our target areas, our worst fuel poor areas. The scale of the challenge is enormous, and we've got to, I suppose, all try and push to get that resource into the county, because as we've heard as well, that Durham's got a lot of deprivation. It's got a lot of legacy issues from in the industrial age, the coal mining era, and we've got streets of empty properties. If you can't make those warm, if you can't get them let, they're going to stay empty. We've got to get the resources into the county, and Cliff and I do that, and we do our best to do it, but it does need a big initiative from the government, and and this needs to be consistent. Something like the All Decent Homes Programme is what is required.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Very interesting to hear the amount of work that is actually going on, and obviously a small team like yourself sounds that we're doing a fantastic job. But as I said earlier to Councillor Richard Bell, we do have the opportunity to raise these issues within government through our existing MPs, and especially now that we hear quite a lot about the levelling up agenda. And that levelling up agenda should also include these issues that you've identified here today. And I'm also certain that the Economy and Enterprise Overview and Scrutiny would be happy to raise this particular issue as well, to certainly develop better plans and better policies and strategies to deal with this very important issue. So thanks for that, Adrian, appreciate that. I've got quite a number of people who still wish to speak. So next on my list is Pauline Craythorne.
Thank you, Eddie. Can I just say I agree a lot with what Adrian has been saying, and I hope that we can make sure that all private landlords at the present have the homes up to standards, because it's the poorest people who live in these homes and are in poverty. So my other question was with regard to getting the message out about the Warmer Homes campaign. We do have in our areas our AAPs, and we have local charities who work within our AAPs. In my particular area, I have Comfort Partnership, and they deal with people who are low on income and in poverty, or people who are coming in who own houses, who can't bring them up to standards and are asking for direction. So do you not think that you could be working with AAPs, passing information down so that they can give more information to the community that's coming into these charities at local ground level? And would it help at all doing that? Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you, Cliff.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, I mentioned in our Warm Homes campaign, obviously with the county being so large, we have the Warm Homes campaign. We have about 900 different sort of community type venues. The AAPs are one of the principal drivers, because obviously we produce a newsletter for the Warm Homes campaign, and it's a cascade effect. So we send it out to as many organisations as possible, then they filter it out to their organisations. And yes, I totally agree with the councillor that the AAPs are one of the mechanisms we currently use. We will continue to do that because they're so well placed within the communities to get that information out there. So obviously that's where the credibility, where the confidence comes from, because the information is being received from a recognised and trusted organisation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Pat Holding, please. Pat, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
That's it, Pat. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm just wondering how many of these meters are inaccurate, because I'm aware of a property where massive bills are being incurred even though the heating and nothing is on. And, you know, is this being looked into as a serious issue in terms of, you know, inaccurate meter readings or faulty meters?
Did you get that, Cliff?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yes, what I would suggest is that if anybody has any concerns about their meter, they can contact ourselves with our Managing Money Better service. Now, obviously, due to COVID, we are slightly changing the way we operate that service. That would normally be a free and impartial service due to a home visit. But obviously with COVID, we can't do home visits at the moment, but we are doing emergency visits. And we did have one recently where the person lost their power supply. We needed to go out to read the meter externally to get them back on. So what I would suggest is if anybody does think they have a problem with their meter, obviously we can arrange to have the meter checked for its accuracy. Everybody has that right, but we can assist the person to do that. Then if there are any billing issues or fuel poverty, fuel debt issues, we can then assist them. So what I would always advise is if anybody has any queries, concerns about their energy usage, their energy supplier, or their tariffs, or any fuel debt issues, they approach ourselves and we can help them through our Managing Money Better service.
Thank you very much, very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Cliff. I now have Bev Colt.
Thank you, Chair. Bev Cole, Eshen, Whitton, Gilbert Ward. Chair, questions predominantly Cliff, and Councillor Craythorne's touched on it ever so slightly, but it was just around the promotion of the two schemes, the Warm Homes campaign and the Managing Money Better. I know, Cliff, you very briefly said how the AP obviously involved in a lot of this. I was just wondering, from a social media perspective, have DCC got any plans to actually push these schemes even further and more, spread them even more? The concern I've got is obviously there's a lot of people who potentially wouldn't in the past wouldn't have needed these schemes, but because of the COVID situation, obviously we've got an awful lot of families who are spending a lot of time at home. If they were on their own, it wouldn't be so bad. They would probably get away with not needing the heating in, but if they've got children in and they're homeschooling, etc., the heating bills are going to absolutely go through the roof. And it's just how we can get this message out to everybody as quickly as possible. And I think I accept not everybody utilises social media, but I think it's a fantastic tool to be able to share this information and get it out as quickly as we can to people who may need the support that's there. Thank you.
Thanks, Bev. Cliff?
Thanks, Jay. Yes, we do have regular meetings with our comms team to do social media promotions. I think we did one sort of fairly recently, but yes, it is a rolling programme of trying to get as many messages out through social media. What we used last time was a case study. So obviously we were able to sort of like interact with a resident who'd received assistance. We took some photographs of them, put them onto social media and promoted. So we probably are due a social media promotion for Managing Money Better. So obviously we have regular meetings with our comms team. So I'll certainly bring it to them to their attention. So that's it. Can we do another one? Because I agree, it is a really good mechanism, but we do use other mechanisms such as the county news. You put it in there, but obviously that's an irregular, obviously information. But as I mentioned, obviously we send it out to the AAPs to circulate. But I agree, I think social media is a very useful mechanism to get that message to people, to pick up obviously that support that's available.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cliff. But also it's important to note when that social media campaign does go out, it's useful if councillors can also share that as well between their particular areas. It's important when that comes out, because it does come out on a fairly regular basis about warm homes. I've seen it myself. But you're quite right. AAPs are an essential area to push that message out there as well. Okay, I've got one other person who wishes to speak at this moment in time, and once I've heard that person, I'll close the debate off. I think it's been a very good discussion there. So I've now got Mark Wilkes.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, I'm not on the committee, but there's a couple of items on the agenda that are of use in terms of the side of things that are to do with climate change. I'll declare an interest as a private landlord. And quite a few years ago, I had some involvement when the coalition government came in. They had some eco schemes then for where you could apply for grants, much like the Green Homes grant at the fund at the moment. And it was exceptionally easy to actually fill in the forms, sort out the process. There was a lot of people doing it. All the money got spent. It was billions. If you jump forward to now, and the government's now scrapped the Green Homes grant, having barely a few % of it having been spent. And I tried to find out how to actually find a company to start with in this county that was able to offer this, because a resident had asked me, and it was impossible. Could not find a single company, and I spoke to Cliff about this as well, he'll probably recall, could not find any way of getting a company interested in this scheme. And the government's now scrapped it. And we'll wait and see. I know Richard was talking about some of this before, what comes along next. But I think we really need to look at what companies we've got in the county and how we can assist them when these government grants come through, to make sure that they're, number one, to make sure they're able to and understand it, because it's so complicated, some of it, but also so that the public know where to find these companies, because just trying to find the companies themselves was a nightmare, going on recommended government websites which didn't work. You phoned up the first company, it didn't do it. The next company said, I'm not bothering because it's too difficult to actually get the grant money. Another one just doesn't answer the phone because the site's out of date and they've gone into receivership or something. I think I must have phoned 10 companies and not one of them was interested. So I think when the next round, assuming another round of some kind of grant funding comes out for particularly things like external wall insulation, which can cost anything from £8,000 upwards, depending on the size of the property. And these grants would have been brilliant because it was £5,000 for somebody towards the cost, and makes an enormous difference on the energy bills. But I think there's hardly anybody in the counties managed to tap into it. So I'd appreciate knowing from Cliff whether we can look at forming our own database so that people have got somewhere to go instead of expecting to be looking here, there and everywhere on the internet, and to start to then work with these companies so that when the next round of grants, assuming they do come forward, because we don't know for certain what's going to happen, we're actually in a position to help people, because I think we're missing out on it, not because of our fault as a council, but because of the way the system's set up at the moment. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Mark. I think it's also important to point out as well that I've noticed in terms of social media, there is a lot of information coming out there from companies who are claiming they've got government grants, and also that they've got the expertise to fit in these new technologies, etc. And you're never very sure whether they're actually reputable companies. Especially when you just see it popping up on your Facebook account. So yeah, I take your point, and I think it's something that we could possibly work on, but I'll hand you over to Cliff on that point.
Thanks, Chair. I'll maybe give everybody a little bit of an update, as Councillor Wilkes was saying on the Green Homes Grant. This is the government's voucher scheme. It was supposed to be a £2 billion project to kickstart sort of obviously job creation, etc. And on the government's website, it says the scheme has been extended to March 2022. I understand this week, seems to be a lot of things have happened this week, that obviously the Minister has provided a written response to say that won't be happening. And the scheme has been reduced, rather than being £2 billion, it's been reduced to about £320 million. So obviously that scheme has been reduced substantially. And obviously that's a great concern. But in response to the question raised about assisting residents, myself and Adrian last week have met with the procurement service, the county's procurement service, to try and put something in place with regards to a contractor framework. So if there's a contractor framework in place, this is predominantly to deliver our own in-house council schemes. Perhaps Adrian and myself can have a discussion with procurement to see if that framework, as it's developed, could also assist residents with contacting registered contractors, because obviously for all the schemes now they have to be Trustmark registered. And I think that's one of the problems, because the contractors have to be Trustmark registered. There's maybe a backlog of people getting through that sort of like approval system and get into the actual sort of programs. So that's certainly something we can maybe sort of take forward with our procurement colleagues and see if something can be brought forward or discussed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Cliff. You happy with that answer there, Mark?
Definitely. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Thank you. Adrian, you want to fill the gap in?
Yeah, just very quickly on the Trustmark side of things. I mean, getting a reputable contractor is very, very important, obviously, and we have seen in previous schemes that you get some less than favourable installations. Now the government has introduced a Trustmark process and a much higher standard of installation, and any contractor able to deliver on the Green Homes Grant must be Trustmark registered. Now Cliff and I, as Cliff mentioned, are working on a framework to actually make sure that we can actually bring on board our own Trustmark registered installers, and hopefully if things did go to plan, those Trustmark registered installers, you know, people phoning us up, local residents wanting work done, we could refer them on. So there's that trust element we can sort of provide if we get the procurement sorted out. So it is a good thing that there's better standards out there now for this work, but it does put an obligation on the companies to actually make sure they meet those standards and have all the certificates in place and everything, which means that often it's harder to get them because it takes time to do that. And the government did rush this in and is now sort of backtracking quite significantly on it, unfortunately. At the end of the day, it will be about also making sure that it's fully resourced, because you won't get a supply chain set up, you won't get contractors committing to this and employing people unless there's a decent revenue stream behind it. And £330 million, a reduction of nearly £1.5 billion already isn't going to put any faith in companies wanting to invest in it. If you're gonna do this, it has to be well resourced, as we've said. If you're going to create jobs, you don't create jobs for 3 months. You create them for 3 years at least, and that's the scale of the challenge that's needed. But we are working on this trust marked framework at the moment.
Thank you, Adrian, for that. Very interesting information. I think we've had a very interesting discussion there with some good points raised, which I'm sure we as a committee will take up, and also Cliff and Adrian will do a tremendous amount of work to make sure that we can deliver effective and efficient services in this really important area of fuel poverty. So I'll bring that to an end there. We do have recommendations on page 22 of your papers today that we received the report, and we agree that further progress report is included in the committee's future work programme. But like I said, we will also make sure that we have a briefing report that will come out on the issues that's been raised here today. Okay, thank you, members. Okay, then moving on to item number 7, highways maintenance. Just before we consider the update on the highways maintenance, I'm not sure whether members of this committee and other committees are aware, but the officer that would normally come and present to us, Brian Buckley, as Strategic Highways Manager, has recently retired from the authority. Therefore, I think it's appropriate that I record my thanks and the thanks of the committee to Brian for his excellent work over the years that we've known Brian. He has attended this committee on many occasions and provided real detailed presentations and responded quite effectively to members' questions on this very important area of work, and especially on the winter maintenance, which is obviously appropriate at this particular time of year. So I'm sure that members of the committee will join me in sending Brian their wishes for a long and happy retirement. Okay. I understand that we now have Paul Watson, Road Safety Manager, who's going to be supported by Paul Anderson today, and so therefore we welcome them to the committee, just to say that you have big boots to fill in this particular area, Paul, so no pressure on you. So on pages 41 to 80 of your papers today, you'll find the full report. We're now going to have a presentation from Paul Watson. Over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'll just share my presentation if that's okay. Right, can everybody see that okay? Confirm that it's on screen?
Yep, can you put it on full screen there, please?
All right, there we go.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll certainly pass on those well wishes to Brian. I'm actually interim Strategic Highways Manager, so I'm standing in for Brian. It's very big shoes to fill. He'll certainly be missed. But also as well, we've got from Highway Services, Paul Anderson, the Inspections and Maintenance Manager as well, who will then kind of help with any queries that committee members have as we go through the presentation. So yes, as you mentioned, Chair, this is a presentation predominantly around highway maintenance, but kind of governing the asset and how we actually manage the asset as a highway authority. We use two documents. The first document is our highway maintenance plan, which really that sets out really how we then manage the asset, the maintenance levels, the condition surveys, and that's published on an annual basis. That feeds in quite nicely into the transport asset management plan, which really then delivers really our performance. That checks then ensuring that we've got the right programmed maintenance at the right time for the right asset to then improve the condition of the asset. So they're the two documents which we use generally across the board for all of our highway services. Now, this image covers really it's a graphic around all of the assets. You will see there is one omission, apologies for that, Chair, which is the cycle route, which runs down the side of the carriageway. I've got some information which I can add to that. Is, as a council, we've got over 1,000 kilometres of cycling infrastructure, and just under 300 or so kilometres of that are actually highway related. So certainly for the for an update, I will add an additional value to the cycle network. But I say that just gives a graphic around exactly what we manage as an asset as a highway authority. Right, to manage all those assets, we obviously need an inspection regime, and there's two types of inspections that we deliver. First one is a safety inspection. That is predominantly around identifying defects, so anything that's likely to cause any damage to property or vehicles or injury to people. We then we have a safety inspection regime where we repair defects. The other one is a service inspection, predominantly around street lighting structures, highway trees, traffic signals and the likes, which is all about serviceability. So that's really enhancing the integrity of the asset and also making sure that it's reliable and that it's usable and functional as an asset. And this is just again, quite a lot of information in this table, but it just really gives you a flavour of how we actually monitor the condition of all of our assets. So you can see the top few ABC roads, predominantly around surveys, which are nationally approved surveys, which we feed back into the Department for Transport. Then as you work your way down, then we've got different cycles, different survey techniques and different frequencies around all of the assets that we manage as a highway authority. So with all of the condition data that we get, we map the actual the condition of the network and the condition of the particular asset. So with this one, it relates to carriageways and footways. So you can see there our A, Bs and Cs, so our classified network, are in a reasonably good condition. So we've got a fair condition target of around 4%. Obviously the ideal is 0%. That would mean that the condition of the network, the condition of the asset, is in excellent condition and requires just general routine maintenance to maintain it in that steady state. However, that's utopia. I think we've got to appreciate that that can't always be the case. And Chair, you mentioned the weather. The weather has a massive impact this time of year on our condition and our ability to repair defects because of the sheer number that are unearthed. Now, our unclassified network and footways are the two areas which we are concentrating a lot of our time and efforts on, purely because, in terms of fair condition, we highlighting unclassified roads and footways as being a particular concern. So over the course of the next few years or so, we'll then be addressing the backlog and addressing the condition of those by the investment or using the investment that we receive from the Department of Transport and also from Council. This is a graph. It's just graphically illustrates the condition of the network. So you can see the classified network on the lower graphs. So that's the A roads, the Bs and Cs. You can see where we're roughly where we need to be in terms of condition and steady state. And then when you look at the other indices, which are the unclassified network and also the footwear network surveys, you can see they're the areas which we are going to be concentrating on coming up in the next few years or so. Right, again, this is major asset. This is street lighting. Members will probably know that we've invested a significant amount of funding across the years into the SLRP, the Street Lighting Energy Reduction Programme, and also as well the column replacement. A lot of that investment will start to really reduce those numbers in the next couple of years. So you can see there from the condition surveys and the number of columns that we've got, which are over 40 years and lanterns over 40 years. That is the work which we're concentrating on at the moment. So the investment that we receive centrally and also from the council is going towards addressing that backlog and those issues. And then we move on quite nicely to structures. Now a lot of the structures are based on bridge condition indices, and you can see there the vast majority of our structures are from 66 up to kind of the high 80s in terms of condition. Now, if I can just explain a little bit about the bridge condition indices. Obviously, what we want is a good condition target of 100%. That means that every single structure that we manage is at a service potential of 100%, which just means then it's just routine maintenance, which will be required to keep it at that level. Where we've got a score of 60, that means for approximately 40% of its service potential is lost. So therefore, that then requires some sort of intervention, and I say that's why we do the surveys, and that's why I identify those projects which need some sort of investment. If we ever got to a 0, that would mean that the asset as well is just not serviceable at all. That when we have kind of catastrophic failure. But thankfully, all of our structures are in what we'd call require some essential work, and that's where the bulk of our expenditure it rests on the structures network. And just to, I know it's not on the slide, but certainly since 2016 we've invested just under £19 million in structures, and we've repaired and maintained over 143 schemes. So it's the whole idea of the asset management principles around structures is to identify the right treatment at the right time, and using the investment that we've obtained over the last 5 years. I say we're certainly moving in that direction. So I say ultimately our target is 100%, but not really achievable in the current climate with the funding limitations that we've got. But I say we're certainly striving towards ensuring that the asset as a structure is they're all serviceable, and we don't have any significant issues. So next slide I've got the bridge condition index. That then details really how we score each of the values from the previous slide. And you can see the vast majority of our slides our assets are from kind of 65 plus. So the bridge stock is in fair condition. None bridges may be in severe condition. That's not to say that that they're in risk of catastrophic failure. We do have 1 or 2 at the moment where we're actually treating them because of that severe condition. But historically across the country, maintenance work is quite underfunded, we'd say. But we're addressing the maintenance backlog with the funding that we've got, and the essential maintenance work that we're completing now really forms kind of the bulk of the work that the structures team are delivering. So it brings us on to footways. This was from a previous committee meeting where footways was discussed. So I'm going to talk a little bit more detail around how we manage and maintain footways. Just a little bit of background there. We've got a statutory duty under the Highways Act to maintain the adopted highway network, and that highway network is inspected and maintained in accordance with the Highway Safety Inspection Manual. Now, this is a national document which has been adopted by most highway authorities, aligned to the National Code of Practice, which is the well-maintained highway infrastructure. Now, that there ensures that we discharge our duty of care and statutory duty to maintain the highway network so that it's in a safe, serviceable and sustainable condition. So in terms of footways management, mentioned before the Code of Practice, we undertake 3 types of inspections. The safety inspection, which I've mentioned before, which is predominantly around defect identification. The service inspections around kind of the serviceability and the maintaining the integrity of the network. And then the last one there is the structural condition surveys. Now, it's a Department for Transport requirement that we assess the condition of our network. So I think on one of the previous slides where we looked at the condition assessments, this is exactly it. We undertake footwear network surveys on about 25% of our footwear network every single year. Now that then helps formulate the capital programme. It helps formulate where we spend our funding for footways to ensure that we have the right treatment at the right time, to ensure that the longevity of any actions that we take are for the benefit of the actual asset itself, but ultimately it's about maintaining safety on a sustainable network of footways that we have. Right, the footwear safety inspections. Now these tend to be cyclic. They're all detailed in our highway safety inspection manual based on a hierarchy of inspection frequencies. Now, all those bullet points there, they detail what we actually include for carriageways and footways. So to determine how we determine the inspection frequency on each of the different assets, we look at the category of the network, the carriage and traffic volume. So those with the highest traffic volumes and highest usage will obviously get the highest degree of inspections. If the route is of significant importance to schools, to hospitals, if it's on the strategic network, if it's a traffic sensitive route, where we have significant numbers of traffic accessing our strategic sites, then therefore that would be kind of bumped as an increased frequency. We look at the accident history as well. Vulnerable road users, is there any vulnerable road users who would use that particular network, and therefore we then increase the frequency accordingly. But the main one for this is local knowledge and expertise, because we have a team of highway inspectors who will go out and they know their areas. 16 inspectors divided into 16 areas. They know their areas. So where we've got significant footfall when it comes to highway inspections, we can then apply that, and then it comes to a highway footway inspection frequency, which is detailed in this table. So you can see the first one, category 1A, which is our prestige walking zone. So really they're the areas around, probably around Durham City, where we have a fortnightly inspection. These are predominantly the large footfall areas, high space, high footfall areas where we've got lots and lots of people using those areas. Because of the risk then of injury, we have a fortnightly inspection, and then following right the way down to the bottom, where we've got local access footways, where they tend to be very, very low use estate roads, where the main roads main routes into cul-de-sacs, they'll be assessed, once a year. So all of those inspections are delivered by, as I mentioned, the 16 highway inspectors, and there's over 11,000 of these planned inspections that are done throughout every single year. Now that's the planned ones in accordance with the frequency in our highway safety inspection manual. Now each of those inspectors will identify defects. Now those defects then are reported back to the hub. The hub will then initiate a repair. Now the highway inspector will use a risk-based approach to categorise the defect. So we've got the three categories there. Category 1 is a 72-hour repair. Now that's something where a highway inspector looks at it. It doesn't have any immediate risk to life or limb. If there is an immediate risk to life or limb because of the defect, the highway inspector will initiate an immediate repair. He may stay with the defect. He may then call in an emergency team to initiate some sort of action. He could barrier it off. But they're the other categories as well, where he'll categorise them into a 14-day response, or in effect 3 months. So the 3 months ones tend to be the ones from his risk-based approach, where they won't have any significant impact on damage to road users, vehicles or property, or any other road user being injured. So they're the three categories of defect. And then just to give you a little bit of flavour around the kind of the numbers that we report, defects could be for anything from pothole to depression, cracks and gaps in the footpath. There's any vertical face trips, any displaced or damaged curbs. Now, all of the inspections will actually feed into our capital programme, which I'll talk about in a minute. But when you look at the numbers that we're talking about within the highway inspection frequency there's almost 70,000 defects identified solely on those cyclical inspections. Now that doesn't include any of the CRNs, any of the member inquiries, anything where we get a report through. That is addition. And to repair those 70,000 defects, we've spent, when you do the kind of the maths in that, there's almost 3.5 million just on highway inspector identified defects. So you can see then it's a huge operation that Paul Anderson and his team deliver on the network, purely to keep the network safe and serviceable. So I mentioned before about the capital schemes. So that's the routine kind of defect repair and general kind of maintenance. We then fall into the kind of the capital schemes. We have mentioned before about the footwear network surveys, where we have 25% of the network assessed in any given year. That then will give us a category, red, amber, green, relating to the condition of the network. We'll then use that information, any highway inspector identified schemes, any member identified schemes, to do an assessment. We've just completed the assessments. They normally start about October every year, and we'll visit around about 800 sites over the space of about 4 months to identify the capital programme. So when you look at the investment that we've achieved over the last 5-6 years or so, it's significant investment on the repair and maintenance of footwear schemes. You'll see the 2018-19, that was a significant jump because of additional funding that we received from the government. So within all of this, we spend huge amounts of money on our footwear network schemes, but also as well on carriageways as well. So my next slide, I'll talk a little bit about kind of the investment, but also as well about the maintenance backlog, because all of the surveys that we complete has an actual impact on what the backlog actually looks like. So this particular graphic relates to the last 5 years or so of our maintenance backlog, and that's against an investment of about 73 million over that period of time from the Department of Transport, and somewhere in the region of about 34 million from Durham County Council. So we're sitting at 2019-20 current backlog against all of our highway assets is about 172.6 million. Well, if you look from really it's probably 2016 where we started to see some significant declines in the maintenance backlog. Now, because we work a year in arrears, we've got to then complete a list of schemes. We've got to then assess the condition before then we can identify what the maintenance backlog is. And I say that maintenance backlog is reported to the Department of Transport, which then sometimes assists in when we actually apply for funding externally, but also as well internally. So if there's any other funding channels available, you know, we use this as it's called almost a lever in order to be able to attract additional funding. So general kind of performance as a local authority, as a highway authority, the Department of Transport expect us to complete an incentive fund questionnaire every single year. Well, the last 3 years or so, we've achieved the maximum band rating 3. In 2017, we were one of the first to achieve that, purely based on the way that we manage our assets, the amount of data that we collect, and the systems procedures we've got in place, linked back to the highway maintenance plan, and also the TAMP, which is the Transport Asset Management Plan. So again, it's all to do with how we manage the asset, and I think personally, you know, we do manage the asset very, very well, and that's borne out by the fact that we've got an accreditation under the asset management, the ISO 55001. We're one of initially 2 local authorities across the country about 5 years ago who achieved this for the way that we manage all of our highways assets. Now that there's an accreditation which is reviewed annually, and thankfully for the last 4 years we've had a clean bill of health every time we've had that annual assessment. So I say it's really good that we've got the ISO that's recognised by the Department for Transport. It was recognised by the Minister at the time as being one of only 2 local authorities. And I say we're continuing to feed into the asset management ISO, really demonstrating that we've got strong asset management principles across all of our highway services. Then the next one is the National Highways and Transport Public Satisfaction Survey. This is an Ipsos Mori poll, which is done independently, and Durham County Council is above the national average in the North East for 5 out of the 6 indicators. If any committee members would like to see that report, I'm happy to issue that after the meeting. But I say it just details a whole range of different transport and highways related questions, which are independently delivered by an external company to our residents. So it's coming straight from our residents' mouths around what they think around the condition of the network, what they think about highways, what they think about other transport related activities. One thing that we are very, very good at, I think, certainly over the last few years or so, and it's embracing the kind of the net zero carbon challenge that we've got, is we work with a lot of our partners, and one in particular, Rayton Construction, where we're using plastic and rubber crumb in resurfacing schemes. So in the past, single-use plastics would always go into landfill. What we are doing now is using technology and innovation to look at the amount of bitumen that we actually use on some of the surfacing schemes. That's then replaced with plastic and rubber crumb, sorry. So that then reduces the amount of fossil fuels and carbon emissions needed when they're actually producing bitumen. So again, you know, the innovation is something which we're very, very keen on. We have to, I think, generally as a service, make significant contributions towards carbon reduction and reducing carbon emissions. And because of the transport and highways related activities that we have on an annual basis, there is an awful lot of opportunities where we can reduce that impact. And the next one I'd like to talk about, and it's my last slide, is around an exciting project we're working with GovTech. Now, GovTech are a central government department who are looking at technologies and looking to make significant investment. I think it's about £1 million in identifying different ways of working, which then reduces the impact on services, particularly with reference to carbon, but also as well making efficiency savings, so that the amount of time that we spend possibly out there on the network delivering the services is a lot more efficient. Now, this project is a Blenheim Gwent partner of ours, and we meet them every fortnight with 2 external companies who are developing Innovative techniques in assessing defects, assessing the network condition, and which ultimately will help with when we come to identify schemes. So the technology works by a camera, which is a 4K technology with 3D capabilities attached to a highway inspector's vehicle. Now, over the course of a year, that highway inspector will have travelled every single square of linear metre of his network. That then will all be picked up by a camera, which will then assess the condition. So this then complements the work that we mentioned before about the condition data that we receive externally to help then identify schemes moving forward. So again, when I mentioned before, the right treatment at the right time, that's something which will just be enhanced with the use of this GovTech innovation project. And that, Chair, is my final slide.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate the time that you spent on that and going over the detail. I think it was also interesting to note, obviously, the miles of roads, footpaths, cycleways that we actually have in the county, and the tremendous work that the county do to try and maintain that, especially from the rurality of the system that we've got. But also you've identified there, as we did earlier, about the weather, and obviously people can become very parochial about the roads and the pavements, because obviously they walk on it every day, and this, as soon as they walk out their door, they see the issues and the problems, and therefore it must take some management of maintaining the highway when it is so parochial, and you must get lots of reports every single day, of which obviously you're not going to be able to satisfy the members of the public readily, because, as you've just identified there, the actual cost and the resources isn't necessarily available. However, in saying that, I think looking at the report that you've provided, I think we have seen some improvement in terms of the maintenance on the roadway. However, beg the indulgence of the committee, I will have one person wishing to speak at this moment in time. Is two areas I'd like to question in terms of the bridge maintenance and bridge condition. You identified in one of your slides there in relation to the bridge index. A note on there, the actual index is reducing. So in other words, the condition of the bridges seem to be deteriorating. Although, as you've indicated, not significant enough to cause any huge concerns. So therefore, do we really have the resources to try and improve that and increase that index as far as the condition is concerned? And I'll bring my other point in relation to footpaths and footpath upgrading. Obviously, there is always question marks about top surfacing of footpaths, and it only seems to be a short-term measure, and whether that is actually cost effective. So I'd like a comment about that. But also, is there a plan to remove footpaths that actually have flagstones installed? It hasn't actually come across in your report there whether you focus on flagstones. And my final point is in relation to the use of plastics. Do we actually use plastics and bitumen when we're doing new footpaths, or is that solely related to the road surface? Thank you, Paul.
Would you like me to come in, Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Paul Anderson may be able to help as well with some of the questions. Yes, generally with bridges, we have been kind of traditionally underfunded for a number of years. And I think with the principal inspections, you'll see why the bridge indices are at the level that they are is because of the principal inspections. So we have, based on risk, principal inspections, which are a more detailed inspection based on kind of between 6 and 12 years or sooner relating to risk. Now, they are identifying a lot more areas which we previously didn't have. So I think by bringing the principal inspections into the kind of the asset management. That's possibly why we're seeing so many defects being identified at the moment. We're constantly applying to the Department for Transport and also the Combined Authority for any significant transport and highways related schemes. Now we've got a couple of bids in with the Department of Transport on various structures, which hopefully will help kind of address some of that backlog and address some of the BCI scores. But again, with the budgets that we've got to apply the right treatment at the right time. And the general inspections and the principal inspections on the bridges are identifying, what those issues are. Every single service area, every single asset area could do with significant millions and millions of pounds of investment, because we've got a backlog of the best part of now on 173 million pounds. But we know we're not going to get that. But I think it's just really to guarantee and to provide a degree of certainty to you, yourself, Chair, and the committee, that the right treatment, the right time with the funding that we've got. If at all we identify through the principal inspections that a bridge is in significant danger, then we will apply back to council for additional funding, and ultimately everything we do is related to kind of improving the safety and the serviceability of bridges. So where we've got bridge closures, and I think we've got a couple at the moment, we've got one very big one in the centre of Durham, requires significant investment. That a lot of that was funded through the Department of Transport and council, and using our existing budgets purely on the basis that the principal inspections has identified an immediate need to deliver some sort of programme. So again, it's just to provide those assurances that we are working, extensively with our colleagues in the structures team, so that any principal inspections identified are treated accordingly with the budgets that we've got. The next question was the plan for flagstones out. Now, generally, we would normally, it's just a standard phrase in the industry is kind of flagstones out and bitmac in. We will only tend to replace flagstones with bitmac where we've got significant vehicle overrun. So that is where we've got parking on verges, or we've got damage because of utility trenches. Because one of the concerns that we tend to have is this tends to be where we get most of our highway claims is trips on flagstones. So if we've got tree roots which have separated a joint, or just naturally through the growth of grass and weeds in between flagstone joints, if at all possible, we will look to remove the flagstones and then put a bitmac surface in. It's a lot more cost effective to put a bitmac surface in. It's a lot more safer longer term, and we're not then going back and having to constantly lift and relay flags where we've got root intrusion or where we've got weeds growing through or any joint separation. And the one around plastics, yeah, we're using plastics on the vast majority of surfacing that we can put in. I mean, it's a great scheme that we implemented, I think initially as a trial going back, and I think it was presented to committee a couple of years ago. And yeah, we're continuing that across all of our treatments. And I say it's great that we can actually quantify the amount of plastics and rubber crumb that we use in all of our surfacing, and that then has ultimately a cost against carbon. So I said one thing we are very, very keen on doing as we approach kind of carbon zero and becoming carbon neutral is working with our framework contractors. There's lots and lots of innovation out there that's happening every single year. Well, Durham County Council's always embraced that, and if it then contributes to ultimately kind of carbon capture and carbon reduction, then I say we're heading in the right direction.
Thank you, Paul. I see Paul Anderson there would like to come in at a point before I bring committee members. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Paul Anderson, Highway Inspection and Maintenance Manager. It was just to try and put a bit more meat on the bones, if you like, on one of the questions. And also you mentioned about flag footpaths, and Paul's already given a response to that. But what I would add on, when Paul identified the inspection frequency in the hierarchy in which my team inspect footpaths in carriageways, what we have, because we do know that footpaths, flag footpaths, give us more likelihood of trips and falls. Whatever the inspection frequency would be determined at, even if it was determined that it would be an annual inspection, the minimum inspection we would do on a flagged footpath is 6 monthly. So we upgrade the inspection frequency based on the fact that it is flagged and it is more likely to be susceptible for people having accidents. And also, Chair, just on the issue, it was mentioned about surfacings on footpaths and whether that was the right treatment. I think, reading between the lines, I think what we're talking about there is specialist treatments, and in this regard, footwear surface treatment, FST. Just to make you aware, in addition to my team doing the inspections, what we also do is manage the specialist treatments for the capital team, for Paul's team, which is the surface dressing on carriageways, which to the layman, maybe layperson, would be tar and chip, the micro asphalt that we use on carriageways, and the FST that I've alluded to on footpaths. Now, Paul's mentioned on a few occasions about the right treatment at the right time. I just wanted to assure members and people listening in that the FST is a treatment that we would use to maintain an existing footpath for an extra 5 to 7 years. It is a cost-effective treatment, but we would not use that if the footpath was degraded to such a point that it wouldn't be cost-effective. And that the only option then would be for us to highlight that to Paul's team and say, we can't do an FST here, you have to look at this for a potential future scheme to reconstruct the footpath. So we are aware of the limitations of the treatment. It is a very good treatment used in the right time at the right place, but it has its limitations, and therefore we would not use it on such instances. That's it, Chair, unless you've got any questions from what I've said.
No, that's excellent, Paul. I really appreciate that, and it's nice to put a face to a name as well. I know we've had conversations in the past about certainly footpaths and small footpath bridges as well. So thank you for that. Okay, I have got 2 or 3 people who now wish to speak. So the first person is Councillor Anne Reid, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. And I didn't know whether I could actually speak here because you kindly invited me from the Adults and Wellbeing Committee, but thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Councillor Anne Reid and I'm from the Crook Division. And I just wanted to ask about unadopted roads. I know that when I was reading through some of the information, I think Durham County Council have 18 unadopted roads within the county. At least one of those is in the Crook Division, and I don't have a lot of information about unadopted roads, only the fact that the one where I live in Greenhead has never had any work done on that for, well, since the 1960s, and it's in a terrible state. It's not only a roadway, the only access road up to about 20 houses, but it's also a footpath. And of course, people who use mobility scooters use that road. It honestly is in an atrocious state. Can you give me some information as to, whether there's funding available, whether Durham County Council, I know it's Durham County Council owned, but is it their responsibility to repair that piece of land, that road, that footpath, or is there some other way that we can look at getting some funding to get it done? I know I've looked at other places in the past, somewhere over Newfield, where they used, Durham County Council were doing a job elsewhere and they had spare materials, and they passed those spare, rather than dumping that material, they gave it to the people at Newfield, and the residents there actually spread it themselves. I'm just wanting some information on, how to go forward with something like this with the unadopted roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for that. Yeah, and we welcome your question. Obviously, you were invited to the earlier part of the meeting, so I've got no issue in terms of you asking the question. However, it is a bit of a parochial question, of which I'm sure the officers would be able to give you probably more detail outside of this meeting. But I'm sure either Paul, may be able to give you a brief response at this point in time. Paul Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, Councillor. I mean, first and foremost, we'll check the kind of ownership of the road. If it's something that's in Durham County Council's ownership, as you've rightly said before, in the past we've used road planings. So where we have resurfacing schemes elsewhere within the county, we tend to provide road planings, and they can be rolled in, which provide a decent surface. But if it doesn't sound as though it's the adopted highway, so therefore it wouldn't have the same inspection frequencies or the same repairs that we would normally associate with a kind of our adopted network. But I'm happy to speak outside the meeting if that's okay to look at it. It might be that Paul Anderson has had this previously and the highway inspectors have visited, but certainly if it's okay, Chair, we'll certainly discuss that outside the meeting.
Thanks, Paul. Paul Anderson.
Thank you.
Hiya, Chair, Councillor Reid. Just to touch on a little bit or add a little bit of what Paul said, the road planning issue is we will provide that, and members actually have the opportunity to get up to 50 tonnes of road planings free if we have work in the area. The other caveat I would put on that though is the way the contract's written with our framework contractor, Maintenance in this occasion, the ownership of the planings are within Maintenance, and it is something that we work with them, because the reason that gives us a cheaper rate for the resurfacing of the roads and the planing off of the roads. But also they recycle those road planings to reuse in the new resurfacing. So that's why on most occasions we will try and help members, but on some occasions we can't, because those planings are being sort of already earmarked for elsewhere. And in terms of the inspection of unadopted highways, that is not something we do as a cyclic measure, but what we would do if a member or a member of the public contact us through the CRM system or via email or whatever, we would do ad hoc inspections, and I have a very, very small budget to do ad hoc repairs. And when I say small, I'm talking £2,000 a year, so it's not a great deal. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So, and obviously, the officers will discuss that in more detail outside of this meeting. But thanks for your question anyway. Thank you, Tom Bolton.
Thanks very much, Chair. My question, I'll try not to be parochial, but it was also about unadopted highways. But it was highways, footways that are shown on the adoptions map that we can all access on the County Council's GIS website, where both in my current job as a parish clerk and for a previous parish I worked for, there were areas that there's one in my current parish which the footway is well made up. Local members tell me that many years ago it was installed by the county council, but it's actually not shown on the adoptions map when I go onto the GIS system. And I wondered if, I suspect that's not with the only area where that occurs. And I'm just wondering why that would have happened, why it wouldn't have been adopted, even though it was installed by the county council. And obviously, if something happens on that path in the future, there are potholes or whatever, and the parish or local residents approach the county council and they say, well, we're sorry, we can't do anything about that because it's not shown on our adoption records. How does one get it onto the adoption records, and why might it have been missed off in the first instance? Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Paul?
Yeah, if I can just jump in there, Chair. I mean, one, it could be an anomaly. One is, Tom, if you've got historical records which show that the county council actually constructed it, and I think constructed it under the auspices of being a highway authority, then it could well have just been missed as an anomaly off the adoption records. Now, we work very, very closely with that particular team. So if you like, I can speak to you outside this meeting and we can discuss in more detail which footpaths in particular, you mentioned, and then we can go back on through our historical records just to look to see whether or not from, the plans going back to the 1800s which show the extent of adoption. If it's been missed off as a genuine error, then I say it's quite a straightforward process of getting it added to the adopted network. I say, but we need to do a little bit more investigation into that before we then decide. There may be other ownership issues, but I say we can certainly discuss that outside the meeting if that's okay, Tom and Chair.
Okay, thanks for that. Leave that in your capable hands there. Moving on to Councillor Liz Brown, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Liz Brown, Neville's Cross. I'm now going to sound a bit like Michael Caine because not a lot of people know this. The flagstones, I'm always very, very disappointed when I find that they've been tarmacked over because they are a habitat for the masonry bee. I don't know if you've walked along and seen little volcanoes in between flagstones. Those are masonry bees. And obviously, when you get rid of the gaps between the flagstones, you get rid of the habitat for the masonry bee. And I just thought that ought to be taken into consideration. It's one of my crusades. I'm sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Not a problem, Liz. I think it is an important crusade to keep up because obviously any life that we've got within our footpaths, etc., is really important. I don't know whether Paul's got anything to add to that. Paul?
Yeah, if I can just jump in. Certainly, it's an opportunity for me to speak with the ecology team to look at the the habitat of the masonry bee. And to be fair, Councillor, I'd heard of the masonry bee because I had certainly a bee had managed to get into my joists. And I was told it was a masonry bee, and you have to be very, very careful because it can nest and cause all sorts of trouble in your house. So yeah, I'll certainly speak to the ecology team, and if there's an alternative habitat that we can provide at very low cost, that then kind of allows the masonry bee to flourish, then if our ecologists can identify that, that would be certainly a good trade-off between flag footpath and bitmac, if that's okay.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think it'll be also interesting, I think, for other committee members maybe to hear what the response is as well in relation to that. So if you could feed back to our committee officers, I'd appreciate that. Okay then, one more person to speak then, and it's Pat Holding, please.
Thank you, Chair. Two short questions, actually. It's about plastics and the use of them. Can you tell me how they compare with a conventional sort of surfacing in terms of duration? And secondly, when you dispose of this material, how difficult is it when you are sort of redoing the paths up again at a future date?
Paul?
Yep, thanks, Chair. Plastics in road surfacing is a relatively new product. There's lots and lots of research being done across the country at the moment in terms of kind of the innovation. So we're kind of bound down to all of the independent research that's happening at the moment regarding durability and kind of serviceability. So I say, unfortunately, we don't have that level of detail yet. However, it's been used kind of, in a lot of areas, predominantly in Scotland. I think they were one of the first to kind of use this. But any trials, anything that we get back from the Department for Transport or any of the technical assessments, we'll certainly be able to bring back to the committee. And the disposal aspect is, this is where we've got potential issue in terms of the disposal, because it is plastic within a road surface, which, as far as I'm aware, cannot be recycled again. So therefore, there is a potential impact on being able to dispose of the material that we take up. We've been putting plastic roads in for the last kind of 3 or 4 years, and we haven't had to plane and resurface any of those yet, because we expect those to last at least 20-25 years. But I say, take on board everything that you say in terms of future recycling. It's something which we've got our eyes on, and I know the industry have got their eyes on, because we want to make sure that anything we put in has got some sort of recyclability at the end of its life. Sorry, I can't answer any more detail on that one.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul Anderson.
Hiya, Councillor. Hiya, Pat. Nice to see you, Pat, in a different setting. I would, in terms of the duration, I would just like to add what Paul said. I mean, at the moment, I think the maximum that plastics that we're putting into the roads is 6%, because the testing that's been done at the moment says that, you know, that it doesn't affect the durability on that. And if we wanted in terms of the disposal of the plastics, if you like, and a chair would like something bringing back at a later date, I could certainly speak to our people within Maintenance laboratories who could give us some indication as to where this is moving, if you like, in terms of development, in terms of disposal and that. So I'm more than happy to speak to our supplier and other suppliers within the industry to see what the latest is on terms of disposal and how much more we're going to be able to input plastics into the road surfacing without impacting its durability or its cost.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I think that will be important. Actually, one of the recommendations from today's meeting is that we would request a highways update later on in the work programme for 21-2022. So I think probably, as Paul's indicated there as well, that, you know, we've been doing this for about 3 years now. So I'm sure we're probably looking for an update on the impact that this surface is actually having on the roads, as well as the recycling issue as well, because I'm sure we've got a lot more detail now available to us after the various testing and research that's gone in. So I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, I've got no other committee members wishing to speak. So again, just to thank the officers for the work and their presentation. And it sounds like you will be fitting the boots of Brian Buckley quite well. So appreciate your time on that. So recommendation you'll find on page 41. Notes the report, and as I've just indicated there, that we include this in a future work programme and progress updates on highway maintenance in the county. Members agree that? Thank you. Moving on to item number 8 then. Just before I leave that, by the way, thanks Paul, both Pauls, but we may need you to hang on just for a little bit in terms of performance management, just in case there's any question comes up in relation to performance on highways, if I beg your indulgence on that. Thank you. Item number 8, Q2 budget forecast. We have Phil Curran, Finance Manager for Neighbourhoods, who's ably supported by Cameron Robertson today. The report can be found on pages 81 to 96 in your papers, and the presentation is going to be shared on your screen as previous ones. So it's now over to you, Phil, for your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Right, just share the presentation, and is that okay?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Phil.
All right, thanks. So this is just an update on the Q2 revenue and capital outturn for neighbourhoods and climate change. Just give a bit of background around the services that are involved in neighbourhoods and climate change. Also talk about the revenue forecast and the variance to the budget and some of the explanations for why that variance has occurred, and also give a brief overview of the capital budgets as well. So there's obviously a lot of detail in the report, but this slide just covers the overall position. So just in terms of quick overview of the services, environmental services, which is the second one down with the budget of 50 million. That includes services such as refuse and recycling, clean and green, neighbourhood protection, also strategic waste, and all the fleet and the depots that the County Council operates. Technical services, you've already heard quite a bit about that in Paul's report, covers highways maintenance, the repairs and maintenance around roads, footpaths, bridges, also street lighting, and strategic highways, which we've heard quite a bit about in terms of the inspection regime and the highways asset management plan and looking after the the roads that all the residents use. Community protection, that covers areas such as environment protection, health protection, which has obviously become very important lately, trading standards, and also elements of antisocial behaviour. And finally, partnerships and community engagement. This was a service that was transferred from transformation and partnerships previously, and that covers all of the area action partnerships, members' budgets, community buildings, and also some of the partnership boards that the county council is involved with. So all in all, the budget for 2021, the revised budget, is almost £109 million. The Q2 outturn, which is based on the expenditure up till September, but also all the meetings and discussions that we've had with budget holders to project what the final outturn would be. That was 122 million. So there was an overspend of about 13.5 million there, but the vast majority of that is to do with additional expenditure on the COVID situation, and that's being treated as outside of neighbourhoods and climate change's control. It's being funded corporately, so that column with the reserves and outside the cash limit basically reflects a lot of that additional COVID cost. Just to give a bit of background around that, as you can see, the vast majority of that additional COVID expenditure was in environmental services, particularly around refuse and recycling, and also the HWRCs, where there's been traffic management costs, but also a lot of the services have had to incur additional agency costs, particularly in the first half of the year when there were increased staff absences. And also there have been additional costs around social distancing arrangements. We've had to have fewer guys in the wagons, and people have had to, some of the operatives have had to kind of travel in cars behind the wagon just so that they could keep socially distanced. That's been applying to not only refuse and recycling, but also highways. And there's been generally a review of the way that the services have had to work to take account of the new sort of environment. So that's all added to the cost. Vast majority of that cost is being funded by central government through various initiatives. So hopefully that won't be too much of a problem. There've also been additional costs in partnerships and community engagement because the AAPs were all given an extra £100,000. And in terms of members' budgets, a lot of the capital budgets were allowed to be spent on revenue, which meant that the revenue budget took a hit there. But it's just important to, I suppose, note that the overall picture is broadly a break-even position for neighbourhoods. Moving on to the next slide, just gives a bit of background around some of the main variances that have occurred within this outturn report. As I say again, there's more detail in the report, but just to highlight a few, there's about £500,000 overspend, which is to do with some job revaluation claims in the areas of refuse and recycling, also neighbourhood protection, and also antisocial behaviour. Those staff members were successful in getting their posts re-evaluated. As members might be aware, a few years ago there was a big exercise throughout the county around job evaluation, and the effects of that were if the employee's expenditure went up, that was met corporately. However, that was a one-off for the introduction of the scheme. So if now there are budget pressures associated with that, then the service has to deal with it, and that's caused neighbourhoods a bit of a problem in that area, although they've been able to recover through other areas of underspend. The second item is some unachieved Mtfp savings from 2 or 3 years ago in environmental services. That was around some initiatives around fleet savings and also in clean and green. Those savings didn't materialise because of a variety of factors, and that's meant that the service has overspent in that area since. However, some new savings have been recently identified, so that overspend will disappear and won't reoccur next year. In terms of new refuse rounds and new wardens, the service did receive some additional budget for 2021 in terms of refuse and recycling because of new housing developments that have been occurring. There becomes a tipping point where the existing collection rounds aren't really sufficient to cope. So a case was made and some budget was found to increase those refuse rounds. However, because of the situation this year with COVID, it's been felt that it wasn't the ideal time to introduce those rounds. So essentially that money hasn't been spent on that and is causing an underspend in the service, which is able to offset some of the pressures elsewhere. The same with neighbourhood wardens. There was some extra money put in to recruit some neighbourhood wardens. Again, in that area of the service, that's been delayed because of COVID. Although there have been other initiatives through government funding to, introduce some extra resource in those areas. Also, there's been an underspend on insurance costs. So broadly, those underspends and overspends bring us to that break-even position of a very small underspend. In terms of the capital outturn, members will see that overall there's a budget of £40 million. The £4.5 million in environmental services, much of that is around climate change in terms of environmental design. There's also there's about £500,000 on waste infrastructure and also some street scene stuff. Technical services, again, Paul earlier on referred to the highways capital budget. About 23 million of that 30 in the current year is associated with maintenance of roads, footpaths, bridges. Sorry, not bridges. Bridges is the 7 million there below, and quite a large proportion of that is the work on New Elvet Bridge that Paul referred to earlier on as well. In terms of partnerships and community engagement, the vast majority of that, around about £4 million, is the Members' Neighbourhood Budget Fund, and there are also some AAP capital budgets. So at the moment, based on all the work that we do, and all of that is forecast to be fully spent. I mean, on the member officer working group that meets on a monthly basis takes reports where if there are schemes that are likely to slip into the following year or have been delayed for whatever reason, then they take reports on that and they agree to slip the budget. So if there was to be an underspend, that budget wouldn't be lost, it would be rolled forward into next year or even the subsequent year, depending on the individual circumstances of the programme. So that's it, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate the information that you've provided in your report there. I think there's a lot of positives from the perspective that obviously of what we've gone through in the past year with COVID, etc. So, you know, a fairly reasonable picture that's acceptable, I think, to the committee, and would seem to be, because at this moment in time I don't see any hands up and I don't see any questions. So I think you've got off quite lightly there today, Phil.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. Okay, so recommendation on page 82 is the committee note the report. I think we've done that. Moving on to item number 9 then, performance management. For Q2, we have Tom Gorman, who always presents this report to us, and your report will be found on pages 97 to 108. Over to you, Tom. I don't think we've got a presentation for this one. I think it's just it's actually contained within your report.
That's correct,
Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Tom Gorman, Corporate Scrutiny and Strategy Manager. This is the routine quarterly report for Q2. As the Chair mentioned, it's something that you get on a regular basis. This current report covers the period up to 30th of June 2020, covering services falling within the remit of this committee. With the reporting period in mind and the pandemic has affected some areas of performance, and I'll mention what those are as I present the report. Our performance reporting is, as it has been for the last 2 years now, structured around the 4 ambitions collectively contained within the vision and the council plan. Within the Connected Communities ambition, our aspirations relating to sustainable communities is what's covered in this report. So the first issue is around cleanliness. How clean is our environment? Cleanliness PIs for litter, detritus and dog fouling, which are the 3 main sort of PIs that we measure, remain good, with performance improving quarter on quarter over the last year. The report contains information on the council's new find and fix service, which actually started in the quarter, covered in this report, and that's new services to address issues around street cleanliness and green maintenance, sort of grass verges and green areas and the likes. The community action team provides that members will be familiar with from various presentations we've had to this committee in the past. It's just completed a programme in the Blackhall area, and they'll be moving on to tackle housing and environmental issues in the Horden area next. Number of fly tipping incidents has increased in the last year, although I think you can see from the chart on the infographic on page 102, I think it is in your pack, that there was a drop last year, so Q2 of this year has actually returned to the sort of 2018-19 levels. Hotspots for this quarter, the Bishop Auckland, Shildon and the Craghead and Southmore areas of Stanley. There's been, in terms of action against fly tipping, there's been 12 fixed penalty notices issued for fly tipping last quarter, and the report also details a successful prosecution for fly tipping in the Fishburn area. Members received a presentation at our last committee on in November on environmental campaigns, which detailed the work that we do to tackle fly tipping. Moving on to in respect of climate change and carbon emissions continue to decrease. Emissions from council operations have reduced by over half since 2008, the baseline that we use, and that equates to 52,000 tonnes of carbon. And I can't sort of even sort of picture how sort of big a pile of carbon that would be. And they have actually reduced by 7% in the last year, so they do continue to reduce. We support businesses to become more energy efficient and reduce consumption, and there is some figures in the report around our BEEP, our Business Energy Efficiency Project. And all of this feeds obviously into our ambitions to be carbon neutral by 2050 as set out in the Climate Emergency Response Plan. Members will note from the report that the Environment Partnership that's charged with sort of monitoring that plan are also developing an ecological emergency response plan, which will set out how we plan to mitigate against the impact of climate change on risk of loss of species and loss of habitat and reduction in species diversity, including the masonry bee, of course. Some of the species in County Durham are pretty rare or even unique to County Durham, so that's an important area. From a scrutiny perspective, this may be something that the committee wants to look at in more detail when the plan's being developed at a future date. In terms of waste disposal, the impact of household waste recycling centres being closed following the national coronavirus restrictions did have an impact on refuse collections in the quarter, with 1,300 additional tonnes of rubbish being collected either through a routine sort of bin collections or through bulky household waste collections, which did increase, and also possibly as a result of coronavirus and the HWRC's being closed. Garden waste clients picked up by I think it was just under 6%. The majority of our waste does continue to be diverted from landfill, with just under 97% being disposed of by other means. Our recycling rate did drop slightly on last year, and that's mainly due to some operators in our supply chain being closed due to the pandemic. That some of them are closed down. They have actually reopened now, having put the various COVID secure arrangements in place. So we do anticipate those rates to improve in the forthcoming year. Contamination does continue to be an issue, however, with nearly a third of our recycling containing contaminants. Other PIs that the committee have for information, they sort of share these, if you like, with the Economy and Enterprise Scrutiny Committee, relate to highways maintenance. You've just obviously heard a presentation from Paul Watson. The percentage of roads where maintenance is recommended have improved for A, B and C classified roads last year, but the percentage for unclassified roads is at a sort of similar sort of level to the previous year, really. There was an interesting chart in Paul's presentation, if I'd like to say so, which sort of gave the figures over the last 15 years, a sort of longer term trend than what we're used to sort of seeing in this committee, and that showed a quite significant improvement in B and C roads over that period of time, in particular with a sort of a slight improvement in A roads as well. The long-term trend for unclassified roads is of deteriorating performance, but you did hear Paul sort of say that this will be the focus of the highways team over the next few years, so I'd expect that to pick up as A, B and C roads have picked up in the past. And that sort of concludes my presentation for the committee chair.
Thank you, Tom. I haven't got anyone wishing to speak. I'll hold just for a few seconds, just in case anyone wants to come in and ask any questions. No questions. Thank you for that again then, Tom. Again, a very interesting report and indication about how the council is performing. Probably a little bit shorter report than we would normally see. I don't know whether that's because of the new vision or whether just basically there wasn't so much to report in this particular quarter. Not sure you can answer that one, Tom.
Yeah, it depends on what indicators we're looking at. So there's some indicators, for instance, some of the climate change indicators for the county-wide picture don't come out every quarter. They only come out sort of once a year. So when they fall due, and there's other indicators in that kind of list, they'll be added to the report, and so the report will be bigger. So it just depends quarter on quarter what information is available to give you the latest picture on.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for that. Okay, then recommendations on page 98 then is that we view the report and we'll look at the impact and challenges, and especially with regards to the pandemic. And I think Tom has ably offered us that information. Okay, moving on to item number 10 then, which is any other business. I've not been informed of any other business, therefore that does conclude the meeting. However, just to make sure that that members wait on the broadcast actually concluding before we actually leave the meeting. That should only be a few seconds, but I'd like to thank you for your attendance and for your questions.